Dr. Andreas Krieg is Associate Professor of Security Services at King's College London.
We're all still in the area and realm of uncertainty. We don't really know what the deal is. We don't really know where he is. What we can say about him, though, is that he's an integral part of a network of companies that we've come to frame as the Wagner Group, which essentially is a network of different businesses, individuals. They're not only just in the warfighting business, they do logistics, extraction, information operations, intelligence gathering, and all of these are different branches and different companies that are organized with different subsidiaries and shell companies. The kind of hub that keeps this all together is Prigozhin. If you were to remove him completely, it's unlikely that Wagner would be able to operate in the way that they do as a globally operating enterprise, of which obviously the operations in Ukraine are essential to the Russian war effort.
OK, so if he disappears or is unable to operate his companies, what happens? Well, let's start with those soldiers who have been fighting in Ukraine.
There is a very strong bond of loyalty to him personally in a way that probably doesn't exist in the Russian armed forces. So the regime wants Wagner to continue to support the war effort. And for that, Prigozhin needs to remain part of the Wagner network.
But those soldiers couldn't be told, look, you're just now signed to the Russian army.
No, I don't think so. And also, we shouldn't really look at the Russian war effort as a sort of hierarchically organized command and control structure as we would have it in the UK or in the US armed forces. It's a network of different entities where there are loads of non-state actors who are loosely connected to the Russian state. In the Donbass, for example, there are obviously the Chechen fighters who themselves are committed to Chechnya, not necessarily the Russian state and Putin, and they're managed by their own intermediary. And then obviously Wagner and the different Wagner branches, which are all part of the Wagner Group or that network of Wagner companies. So it's a very loose affiliation of different network entities that nobody really controls.
So what, they go home?
I don't think they will go home. They will continue fighting. And, there's a transformational and a transactional element of control. The transactional one is pay, is contract to the company. The transformational one is personal loyalty to Prigozhin and other superiors. But there's also loyalty to the overall Russian war effort. We shouldn't forget that Wagner is positioned all over Africa, but also South America. They're in the Middle East as well. And they've been able to rotate people around. So if people were, for example, put on a list for, let's say they were criminally indicted, they could be moved around to another theater and continue working and fighting there.
OK, but you remove Prigozhin or you stop him operating, and then who's paying them?
They're a self-funded network, and that's the whole point of it. It was deliberately set up by the Kremlin as a self-funding enterprise, particularly as they moved into Africa. And here the interesting part is the entire African network of Wagner is run and facilitated by infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates, where they have a banking sector, they have logistical companies that are based in the UAE, but this infrastructure still exists. So in that respect, it doesn't require the Russian state, it doesn't require Putin to continue operating.
So if Prigozhin was removed in any way, what happens to the efforts in Syria, in Central African Republic, in Mali, and all these countries around the world?
I think what has been destabilizing the network already has been the war in Ukraine, because it has consumed so much bandwidth of a globally operating enterprise, just in terms of the numbers of people who've been tied down in the war in Ukraine, which really dwarfs everything else that they've been doing across the African continent. But then there are subsidiaries in Africa who continue operating autonomously, and they will continue operating. And we've seen that they operate fairly independently of the war effort in Ukraine. So even if Prigozhin was somewhat removed, I would suggest that these locally run businesses will continue operating even without him being there.
OK. Now, there have also been trolling factories, basically people employed to cause mayhem online, and they were silent in the immediate aftermath of this. What do we know about what they're up to now?
The fact that they've been fairly silent in terms of we would have maybe, seen them try to push narratives for Prigozhin against Putin suggests also to us that what happened on Friday, Saturday was maybe not really a coup attempt. It was an attempt by Prigozhin to show his force, not really trying to get rid of Putin, but just getting rid of certain people, putting pressure on the regime to say, look, I want more control, a higher stake, and I want this war effort to go well. It wasn't really directed at Putin.
But it didn't work.
It did work, I think, because if you look at it from Putin's point of view, he now has a narrative of saying we could have won the war in Ukraine. We didn't because we were backstabbed. That was kind of the narrative. I think both of them can walk away from this, Putin and him, being somewhat in the driver's seat.
Dr. Andreas Krieg. Well,